Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this week's episode of Learning Sparks. My name is Richard Hazler. I'm the proud principal of Pequannock Valley Middle School in Pompton Plains, New Jersey. We're a grade 6 through 8 middle school, part of the Pequannock Township School District, and we are very excited today. This is a special episode of Learning Sparks. We like to talk about instructional strategies that enhance student achievement in the classroom, and I'm honored to have our guest today, Weston Kieschnick, author of Bold School. He's here today at our Pequannock Technology Summit, and I thought it'd be a great opportunity to talk a little bit about blended learning and the impact that that has on students in the classroom. So Wes, thanks for being here.
Awesome, Rich. I'm happy to be here, man. Thank you.
Really appreciate it. Wes rocked the keynote this morning and has been working with our staff today. And so I thought, just the first question I thought I'd ask you is tell us a little bit about how you came up with your book, Bold School, maybe a little bit about yourself, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, absolutely. So just a quick bit about myself. Like I am a teacher at heart. I love teaching. It's how I began all my keynotes with, all people need to know about me is that I have the heart of a teacher. I love teaching. And so the genesis for writing Bold School was just really simple. So Bold School is just a mashup of the words blended and old, because when I started to look at blended learning, both from my side as a practitioner at the time, and then through the leadership perspective, and then just through the lens of a learner, what I started to notice is that this view of blended learning was starting to develop, that blended learning is just exclusively, station rotation or flipped learning or flex models, and I was just like, man, those models are great, they're wonderful, but I was concerned because there just didn't seem to be much room for that traditional practice that we know works with kids. Mm-hmm. Not that we love just because it's something we've always done and we love it and we don't want to deviate, but we love it because we know it works with kids. And I tell the story of the guy I did my student teaching with, who was an absolute master teacher, Kirk Datto, and I think about him all the time, and I thought about him a lot as I was writing the book, because I worried that in the pursuit of innovation, we would have pushed out really great teachers like him, really great, quote-unquote old school teachers who have these great methodologies and do these amazing things that work with children. Right. And so I wanted to say, hey, if you are the direct instruction master of the universe, or if you are the Socratic seminar master of the universe, or if you love concept mapping, where do opportunities for blended learning live in those spaces? And the answer is, they do live there. There are abundant opportunities to still, hold on to those practices that we know work and blend with purpose in a way that works for both kids and for teachers. Because, the number one fear that a lot of teachers have around blended learning is that the arrival of technology represents the departure of everything they love about teaching and learning. And I didn't want that to be the case. Right. I didn't want teachers to feel like their practice was broken, like they were broken. They are the number one thing that has always worked about teaching, and they still work. And we have to make sure that great tools serve great teachers, not that we arrive at this place where great teachers are supporting these great tools.
One of the things you said today, I got a round of applause from our staff, is that education is not broken.
No.
And that there is a place for every kind of teacher. We talked a little bit earlier about the difference that we're seeing now in new teachers and what we see in veteran staff. So, what advice would you give to a veteran teacher now who has all this technology and is getting thrown a million different gadgets and apps and all these things? What advice would you give to a veteran teacher today?
Yeah, so I think every veteran teacher out there, every teacher in general, should be able to identify what is the thing you're awesome at, mm-hmm. right? What is the thing that you are great at? Because when I do professional development or I do instructional coaching with teachers, I'm a huge advocate of coaching to strengths. It's the thing that we do in every other coaching field, right? So I told you earlier, I still coach high school football. I love it. We've got this kid right now who's 5'8", 5'9", runs a legit 4'4", 4'5", 40. He is super fast. Right. I'm not going to take that kid and make him an offensive lineman. It doesn't make sense. It right. doesn't suit his skill set. I'm going to take him and put him in a position to be successful based on where his skills live. And the same should be true for teachers. So for a veteran teacher, I would say, what is the thing you're awesome at? Again, do you love interactive video? Right? Do you love close reading? Figure out the thing that you are awesome at, that you are great at, and figure out ways that you can use technology to make you more effective and more efficient at that thing. Mm-hmm. Grow your strength, grow your blended competency in the place where you are already strong pedagogically, and then figure out places where you can grow as a pedagogue while adding technology to grow those competencies as well. That's how we grow overall proficiency, not just all right, let me throw a dart at a strategy and throw a dart at a tool and figure out how to mash these together, and now I have to learn both at the same time.
Yeah, no, we did a book study with my staff last year. And one of the things that they latched onto was the lecture piece, because
Yeah.
they're being told now that lecture is not a great strategy to use. You got to have students engaged in learning. It can't just be all about you. But what I liked about in your book is that you talked about how lecture is such a powerful tool when used effectively in the classroom. So if you could just talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, lecture is a super powerful tool, and lecture as a part of direct instruction, and we got to be careful not to use those interchangeably, right? So direct instruction includes lecturing and feedback and questioning, like all of those things are part of direct instruction. But lecturing is not bad. Right. But as educators, we have to come to consensus, like. Lecturing and direct instruction didn't get a bad reputation because it's a bad strategy. It got a bad reputation when it became our only strategy, and that's on us.
Yep.
That's on us. That's where we have to grow as educators. But that doesn't mean we throw the baby out with the bathwater and we just say like, oh, direct instruction, bad. No. If we look at John Hattie's work, direct instruction has an effect size of around 0.6, which means kids can potentially grow in a year and a half over a single academic year's worth of time. Direct instruction needs to still be a part of what we do and what happens in our classroom. It works. It's effective. Our challenge is, how do we support a strategy like direct instruction once we've identified that it works with a digital tool like Kahoot, right? Let's not play Kahoot for Kahoot's sake,
sure,
right? Let's not do a poll everywhere for poll everywhere's sake. Let's not use Mentimeter for poll everywhere's sake. But how can we integrate these tools into a moment of direct instruction so that they can provide us feedback and we can provide direct instruction in chunks where we're teaching kids based on the feedback they give us in the moment. We're providing direct instructions relative to places where they have gaps, and relative to places where they're telling us they already know this. We can shorten our direct instruction and move on to the next thing.
And that's so huge because you're talking about a lot of things there. You're talking about engagement, you're talking about feedback, you're talking about analyzing a student's growth, their gaps, where they may need to be. When you're talking about learning sparks in the classroom, getting kids engaged in what they're doing, it is our responsibility to find those issues where students may be weak and capitalize on them, and that's where the tools can become very effective.
Yeah, and you can use those tools in such a way where doing all of those things doesn't have to be a nightmare for the teacher. Because when you're talking about creating learning sparks in the classroom, sparks come from fire, right? And you cannot have a fire in your belly about teaching if you're so concerned that creating all of these teaching and learning moments are just going to absolutely grind you down to the nub, and then you're going to have no energy and or enthusiasm to implement any of these. It's again one of the reasons why I wrote Bold School, is because I wanted to create blended learning scenarios that worked both for kids and for teachers. And the fact of the matter is, for better or for worse, it has to work for all stakeholders in order for it to continue. Because there's not a single initiative that I know of, not one, that can thrive in a culture of negativity. And if we don't have positive attitudes around blended learning and the fact that it can make us more effective and more efficient at the great work that we do for kids, then it's not going to be something that takes hold and has a lasting impact.
Well, let's talk about that effectiveness, because one of the things you talked about in the keynote, and I won't steal what you did in the keynote, you got to get Weston to come and give a keynote, but you talk about your strategic blended framework and what makes that up. Maybe you could talk a little bit about what that is and how that leads to effective instruction and effective learning in the classroom.
Yeah, absolutely. So I talked in the keynote, and every time I come speak about that Bold School methodology, there's a lot of excitement about what's going on in the ed tech space right now, and justifiably so. There's so much to get excited about. But the fact of the matter is that excitement can lead us to poor decision making. And so what happens is we'll stumble across a tool like Nearpod or GimKit, and it's like, these things are amazing. But then the next question that comes into our brain is like, oh man, Nearpod is awesome. What am I going to do with Nearpod tomorrow?
Right.
Danger, danger, danger.
Not a good thing.
No, because right in that moment, the focus becomes the tech tool, and we have to be about rigorous and relevant learning outcomes for kids. We have to be about high effect size instructional strategies so that kids can meet those outcomes. And the minute we start asking questions like, oh, what am I going to do with Flipgrid tomorrow? Kids lose.
Sure.
Kids lose because the focus becomes the tool. So in those moments, we have to be able to step back and say, no, not what am I going to do with Flipgrid tomorrow? What's my rigorous and relevant learning outcome that I want to accomplish here? What highly effective strategy am I going to leverage so that kids can meet that learning outcome? And then the question becomes, can Flipgrid, or whatever the tech tool is, support that instructional strategy so that kids can meet that learning outcome? And can Flipgrid support that instructional strategy to make the strategy more effective and efficient than it's ever been before? And if the answer is yes, then we plan, because we know what gets planned gets done, and we assess for rigor relevance. Is what we've designed even any good? Are students working to a place where they work and think?
Now, you're a senior fellow for the International Center for Leadership and Education, right?
Yes.
So then you talk about the rigor relevance framework, and that framework goes from teachers doing to students working.
Yes.
And so moving from that A quadrant to D quadrant, that's a large gap.
Yeah.
And for a new teacher, that's a hard thing to get to. Because it's hard to give up control of the classroom.
Absolutely.
So, from an administrator standpoint, what coaching advice do you have to help new teachers as they embark on this journey of teaching? To have these strategies be focused on the outcomes first,
yes.
right? But then incorporate this technology. Considering we're a one-to-one school, I know a lot of schools are moving to getting technology in the hands of kids, and that they think that's going to solve world problems, but we know that it doesn't.
Yeah.
And so it comes from what advice do we give to new teachers to help use technology powerfully?
Yeah. So you talked about the rigor relevance framework, and for a new teacher looking at the rigor relevance framework, again, so think of it, I like to break it down and think of it really simply, right? So quad A is the teacher does all the work.
Yep.
Quad B is the student does all the work. Quad C is the student thinks, and then quad D is the students work and think. And we have to get kids working towards quad D, right? When we're talking about using digital tools, we have to ask ourselves, are kids using these digital tools, right? And is the teacher asking them to use it in a way that aligns with proven pedagogy so that they can meet rigorous and relevant learning outcomes?
Mm-hmm.
And in their use of those tools, are they using it to work and think? And that can be daunting, like you said. It can be really daunting for a new teacher. So what we have to make sure our new teachers know, and all teachers know for that matter, is quad D is a place you visit, not a place that you live. Right? And it's so critical to understand, like, the expectation isn't that we move every moment of every lesson, every time, all the way up to quad D, where kids are working and thinking and applying this new knowledge and new skills to real-world unpredictable scenarios. If you try to do that all day, every day, A, you will fail, and B, you will quit, because you'll feel like a failure all the time.
Yep.
Quad D is a place you visit, not a place that you live. Now, asterisk, quad D is not a place that you visit on the family vacation once a year. Right? There's a happy middle ground there where it's not a place where you visit almost never. It's not a place you're going to live every day. Like, you're going to venture in and out of quad D moment to moment throughout the course of a lesson. And I think once teachers start to understand that about the rigor relevance framework, it kind of alleviates the stress and anxiety that comes with it.
And correct me if I'm wrong, in that C and D area, that's where you can really build in the grit and the growth mindset with kids, and teach them that failure is okay.
Absolutely.
That they can get after it. It may not work the first time, it may not work the second time, but it may work the third or fourth time.
Absolutely.
It's that perseverance and reflection that we want the students doing when they learn.
That's absolutely true. There's value in each of those quadrants.
Yep.
There's going to have to be time, whereas the teachers, we're living in quad A.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the teacher, I got to do some work. I got to do some of the heavy lifting because I possess a skill set or a content knowledge that my kids don't have, and I need to give it to them. And the only way for me to do that is to put in some work. So yeah, absolutely. There's stressing and understanding that there's value in each one of those quadrants, and it's not like, quads A, B, and C are four-letter words. They're not.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things that I loved about your book is how you use data. And data is a scary word for educators in general, but you use John Hattie's work for a lot of your book.
I love John Hattie's work.
Visible learning is fantastic. So when you were talking about that and thinking about it as you wrote your book and you looked at different strategies, what was a teaching strategy that really stood out to you, aside from the direct instruction, which we talked about? What was one that you really said, wow, I never realized the impact that this really had on student learning, and maybe that effect size is very high?
Yeah, so a couple of things there. I love John Hattie's work. I'm a huge John Hattie fan. He was nice enough to come out and endorse the book, which I was over the moon about. And you talked about data, right? And I always refer back to that Doug Reeves quote, we're drowning in data and starved for information.
Yep.
And when you take a look at John Hattie's work, sometimes it's easy to feel that way.
Sure.
Because he's got so much data and it's easy to drown in it. And so what I wanted to do with John Hattie's work was really identify, he's got 256 influences about what works and doesn't in education. And so I wanted to take a look and say, okay, from a practitioner's perspective, what are the 10 or 11 most frequently used high-yield strategies that teachers are using? And you asked me which one of the ones I love so much. I love reciprocal teaching. I love reciprocal teaching for a couple of reasons. Number one, I think it's often misunderstood. A lot of teachers will tell me that reciprocal teaching is a strategy where students teach other students.
Right.
Well, it's not. That's pure tutoring, right? I love reciprocal teaching. It's a close reading strategy that it can be used anytime kids read anything, any grade level, any content area, which is what I love about reciprocal teaching. And so it's a simple 4-step methodology whereby anytime students read anything, they predict, they clarify, they question, and they summarize.
Right.
They make predictions about what they're going to read. They clarify important vocabulary before they read the text. Right? They ask questions about the text, not the teacher, but they ask questions about the text, and then they're provided opportunities to summarize. I love that methodology. It's a methodology that I've been using with my own children since they were babies. Right? Anytime my kids would read a story, we'd do story time at night. We'd do a quick picture walk, flip, 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 make a prediction. Right? We'd go through, I'd point at sight words. They'd read their sight words, and then I'd point at a word that wasn't a sight word. And I'd say, hey, read this word for me. Do you know what it means? And if they didn't, we'd hop on my phone and we'd look for a picture that represents that word. Then we'd go through, read the book, and I would ask them, hey, Everett, Charlotte, what's one question you would ask the author of this book? Or what's one question you would ask the main character of this book? Right? And then last but not least, I would have them retell or give me a summary of the book. And it's a thing I've been doing with my own children, like I said, since they were babies. And they've been reading a grade level or two above their proficiency level since they entered school. And that has nothing to do with me, and don't tell her I said it, nothing to do with his mother, right? It has everything to do with the application of a highly effective strategy over time.
What you talked about that in one of your workshops today, and one of the teachers walked out and they said, wow, I never looked at reciprocal teaching that way, the way you just described it, and the impact that it can make on kids. And so the takeaways from what you've done today with our staff, is going to make lasting impacts in the classroom, and that's a testament to you and to your message. But we're in closing, we're going to finish up. The Pequannock Summit Tech Summit today, we had a series of workshops focused on ed technology, and one of the things that Wes really talked about is that it's not about the technology, it's about the outcomes and the strategies, and then putting the plan in place. So, what's the last piece of advice that you have for us here at the district, or just teachers in general, about the effective use of blended learning?
Yeah, let's all get on the same page. Let's all get on the same page, and I'll say one of the things that I say in my keynote. We have to come to an agreement that in the space of blended learning, learning is king, and growth is queen, and cool is the court jester. And the jester is technology, and the jester has value, but don't put him in charge of the kingdom.
Well, I want to thank Wes. Thanks for being here today. Thanks for being at the Tech Summit. Wes does a Bold School Chat every other Sunday night on Twitter. Highly recommend that you hop on there and talk about student learning. We talk about a variety of different strategies. Last week we talked about RTI, I think was one of our topics.
Yep.
And Wes is truly just a gifted educator. Highly recommend that you bring him to your schools and do some PD for your staff. But Wes, thanks again for being here. You can follow him on I think it's Wes_Kieschnick. Is it?
There you go.
Wes_Kieschnick on Twitter. You can follow me on Twitter at Rich Hazler. And thanks again for joining us on this episode of Learning Sparks. And as I say at the end of every episode, always do what's best for kids. Have a great day, everybody.